Yeah.
Thanks.
Would you like me to advance your slides or?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Could you
Yes.
share our slides?
Give me.
We already discussed Team B being the best team. Nice job, best Team B.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. And yeah, thanks for listening to our talk. And after the great talks earlier, I mean, Team B is on fire right now. So we'll try to make the best use of this opportunity. And yeah, our diverse team is spread across 19 different time zones, with Japan being the far east and Hawaii the far west. So I will just start off introducing the team members. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, it's composed by myself, Eligio, and next by Ricky. Next slide. Ricky, and she couldn't make it today, but yeah, contributed a lot to this project. And then next slide, Liz, who will talk in the next few couple slides. And then next, Chandra. And then teammate Jamal in the next slide. And our team mentor, Nate. So yeah, I think we are ready to start talking about our project. I will pass it to Chandra.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the introduction to our project and kind of what we were thinking and our process behind our thought. So each time, of course, a weather event causes significant loss of property and loss of life. There's a natural disaster. Natural disasters are particularly important to small or natural disasters are particularly important risk, I should say, to small lower income countries because they can quickly wipe out a significant portion of their GDP. There's sort of strong evidence that warming and drying caused by climate change is related to an increase in these disasters, where their frequency, their size, their intensity, the severity. A couple of those that we've particularly focused on are wildfires, of course, being one of the most complex natural disasters because of the many factors sort of surrounding them. So we've got the many factors, including vegetation types, drought conditions, and just like the many ways that people culturally can alter a landscape as well. So climate change has accounted for about half of this increase in vegetation dryness since about the 1980s. And this, of course, has nearly doubled the areas burned by wildfires and lengthened the average wildfire season. The second natural disaster that we looked at were floods. So these are also increasing in frequency and intensity due to climate change. And this rise is expected to continue throughout the century. Warmer air, of course, holds more moisture, meaning heavier rainfall. And research shows that for temperature and precipitation are very important predictors of most disasters. Higher temperatures associated with more disasters caused by droughts, wildfires, heat waves, cyclones. And of course, more rain is associated with fewer disasters caused by droughts, wildfires, and heat waves, but also with more disasters caused by floods, landslides, and cyclones. So we realized that natural disasters are very complex, and with the actual effects of disaster being more impacted than just being impacted by just environmental variables. So we wanted to create this holistic picture of the effects of natural disasters by bringing in metrics across biological, ecological, and cultural variables to assess the effects of natural disasters as a as a whole, as well as to try and determine risk and resilience across a range of these variables in this sort of global framework, because we do have members from across the world in our team. So could you go to the next slide, please? So for this small project, we focused on the recent wildfires in Hawaii, being that of course Maui just kind of burned down, and we realized again these are really complex problems, and so we wanted to not necessarily look at what was causing those problems and what those sort of predictors are, but we really wanted to look at how the different communities are impacted by these natural disasters. So if you go to the next slide. So our research question really sort of revolves around this this question of like how do natural hazards affect measures of community, cultural, and biological diversity. So we thought about sort of the different predictors that could be used in the model for something like this, and how different predictors across sort of these really large values and metrics of diversity, what could be interesting. So we thought about what sort of disaster characteristics, so sort of before disaster measures of community, cultural, and biological measures, how those would predict a response for the sort of after disaster measurements of those same metrics. So could you go to the next slide? With that,
okay. So as a team, we wanted to select data sets that would allow us to measure, to give us a holistic measure of impacts, both ecologically and socioculturally. And this is our some of our preliminary selections, but we also wanted to point out that it will be important moving forward as we refine our target metrics in our analysis, that we identify global equivalents in some cases. So for instance, we're using social vulnerability index, which is US based, and so we'll need to come up with something that will allow us to do that globally. And my apologies in advance, this is a slide that did not get finished. We were pressed for time, so there's a lot of typos and issues with this one. In terms of biodiversity, we selected the GeoBond data set because we felt that this was a really good choice because it pulls and synthesizes data from a bunch of different sources. So it's a great one-stop shopping choice. And within that, we want to use alpha biodiversity as a general measure, ability to look at habitat type, making sure that we choose across and vary habitat type across each of the sites that we're looking at, from low to high biodiversity, and then ability to look at things like indicator species that can signal important habitat changes. In terms of community and cultural metrics, we want to look at social vulnerability in general and some of the key aspects within that. And also we see using a data set like OpenStreetMap, which will allow us to get at information about infrastructures and resources that can be really meaningful, such as things like looking at remote locations where distance from resources and infrastructure could really impact the ability to respond and recover from a hazard. And then in terms of recovery metrics, we want to look at the percent of people who are of houses that were able to be rebuilt, and then those that rebuilt, what are the changes in who's able to return and rebuild. So how do we see that population change? And then there are a bunch of data sets, remote sensing data sets that we can use for this analysis to give us a global picture. Some of those include MODIS, hydrosheds, chirps, and NDVI. And then hazard-specific data sets. There are a number of flood-related data sets that we didn't really have a chance to explore, but we were talking about wildfires in Hawaii. So we took a look at the fire data set and also the ICS 209+ data set, which allowed us to take a detailed look at the hazard, looking at the hazard characteristics, response, and societal impacts such as number of structures destroyed, threatened, damaged, and destroyed, fatality and injury data, and values at risk. So go to the next one.
So the methods that we thought about doing this work was, we were very well aware that there are a lot of different predictors and data sets that we were interested in to try to create this like whole holistic view of the impact of these fires or I guess natural disasters. So the first thing, of course, we would have to do is some sort of data set reduction technique on only a few sample sites, right? So, we think about this in terms of, we would ideally like this to be a global sort of modeling system, but that is likely going to be difficult given data set availability, especially, the sort of before and after temporal scales based on natural histories or natural disasters. So to start off with, we want to just sort of look at a few different sites or a few different disaster sites, and of course try to reduce the data set in terms of the number of features, just by using some feature reduction techniques and removing the various features that may be highly correlated on, or use PCA to get rid of, to just look at sort of that to change the scales into the pi variation. And then for the actual modeling itself, we realized there were a couple of different ways we could go about this, and each one had their pros and cons. So we looked at the just typical regression techniques, and sort of using these bagging, boosting, and stacking ways to create these models, which were nice to think about, in the fact that we could probably get the predictor coefficients really important for each of these predictors for, again, the effects of the effects on these sites. And then secondly, we thought about using convolutional neural networks, which of course may be good for prediction and sort of looking at these really, really large data sets, but may be difficult to actually figure out what features are being used when it comes to predicting, and that would be a really key thing for us. Would be to figure out which features are important here. So, and again, we didn't want to do this across a global scale. We wanted to first begin by looking at these sort of communities that have a range of numbers across those predictor values. So of course we thought about the Hawaii fires and the Marshall fire and the Marshall fire in Colorado, and then some flood sites from Europe and Mozambique, as well as the wildfires in Greece. Next slide, please.
Okay, so once we refined our research question, we didn't have a lot of time to do data exploration. And one of the things we debated about in terms of our research question was whether we wanted to focus on comparing, focus on impact or focus on risk. So we did some exploration using GeoPandas. And this data is taken from the Hawaii Planning GIS site. And the plot on the left looks at wildfire risk zones and native Hawaiian communities on Oahu. And then the plot on the right looks at threatened and endangered plant distribution on Oahu. So just starting to look at some of those factors we were interested in taking a look at. And then I looked at used the ICS 209 plus data set to look at the history of wildfire in Hawaii. And so we picked some Hawaiian wildfires. And then Jamal took a look at the fire data product, and he's going to talk about that analysis next. So go to the next. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so as Lisa just said, and it's part of our earlier parts of our preliminary data analysis, in combination of looking at the ICS 209 plus database, we also took a look into the Fired Hawaii data set. So this data consists of fire event data collected between 2003 and 2020. What I'm showing you right now is all the data collectively. It's not separated by island. We wanted to use this to help us identify not only some predictor variables that could be of significance for building our model, but also particular fire events we might want to emphasize on when considering community recovery post-fire at certain time intervals. So to start off in the top left corner, we look at year by the number of fire events, and we see that in 2007 actually had the greatest number of fire events. But if we were to look at the bottom right corner where we see year on the y-axis, we see total area burned. 2005 and 2018 actually had events that had the largest total area burned. So those years would be of significance for us to focus on when considering building our model. Event duration tended to be evenly distributed, which is the graph in the top right corner, except for one event, 2003, which consisted of an event that lasted longer than 15 days. Next slide, please. All right. In addition to considering the year, we also looked at vegetation or ecosystem type. So in the top left corner, we look at number of events by vegetation type. Sorry for the font size, wasn't able to adjust that quick enough before the presentation, but the grasslands tended to actually had the most number of fire events. For fire event duration, grasslands also had the greatest number of days that an event lasted. But after that, what's interesting is woody savanna was second for event duration, followed by evergreen broadleaf forest. In the bottom left corner, we look at total area burned by vegetation type. We also see that grasslands had the greatest total area burned, followed by savannas and woody savannas. And we also wanted to look at if there was any change in the distribution of vegetation type that fire events were taking place in by year. And that's the graph shown in the bottom right corner. Overall, in general, it seems that grasslands tend to be the most prominent location for fire events to occur in, regardless of year. But if we look at 2007, which consists of the most fire events determined by that graph I showed you on the last slide, we see that not only did fire events occur in grasslands, but they were also appearing in woody savannas, croplands, as well as closed shrublands. And 2018 had the second highest total area burned, and 2018 fire events took place in grasslands, woody shrublands, as well as closed shrublands. So why this is important is because we'd want to, now, I think something that would be helpful for us that we haven't done here, like I said, we didn't look at the distribution of these events by island. Also, it would be helpful to plot the events as well as the distribution of ecosystems on a map to look at if there's any clustering of events. In regards to social impacts, we would like to look at if there are any relationships between the distribution of community type and their surrounding ecosystem type to see if certain communities tend to be surrounded by community ecosystem types that had the greater number of fire events. In regards to impacts on, or my apologies, in regard to biological impacts, we would also want to consider looking into recovery rates and differences in recovery rates by ecosystem type, and which communities that we have within our data may contain some of those endangered plant species that we had shown you on a few graphs previously. I'll pass it on to Lise to close it out.
Okay, thanks. I just have a couple closing remarks. It's been a great experience being this hackathon with our team. We had representation from around the world with a broad set of skills. One of our teammates pulled multiple all-nighters to be a participant in this, and another got up before sunrise in order to participate. The thing that was really important to us was to come up with a research question that covered our various expertise and interests, and we feel like we were able to do that. And it's still really early, but something that we're very interested in working on. Thanks.
Thank you. And it is really interesting. I absolutely agree. And it's wonderful that, from my perspective at least, that you guys are considering social vulnerability at least, because those metrics are really going to help us build more resilient communities. So thanks for looking into that. It's wonderful. Thank you all. Congratulations. We have time for a couple of questions.
I think you popped up at the same time. How about Andrew goes first?
Okay, thanks for sorting that out. I guess I was you covered a broad array of topics, and I was looking for the sort of the core AI model that relate the like what are your predictors and the response function that'll help you answer your final question on disturbance and climate change.
Yeah, so I mean, we presented just a wide number of data sets that we're all hoping to, I mean, depending on the data availability for the sites that we're looking at, we'd like to attempt to use sort of those different rasters in terms of predictors, and then the response variables would be sort of those same variables maybe after a disaster event.
And just to follow on that, do you expect, I mean, what I really appreciated was like all the detailed data sets that you looked into, some of my favorites. So I was excited to see, but would you expect, looking at these different sites and locations, would you expect to apply different data sets for your analysis depending on where you are? And maybe you could speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, definitely. So you said we wanted to look at like a range of those predictors across different communities, because we were well aware, right, that like certain predictors were not going to be useful for certain communities, which sort of ties into the data set reduction part of all of this, where we try to figure out which variables are going to be more important to certain sites than others.
So if I can add on that also, because as mentioned before, we didn't have much time to look into floods. So we expect that different regions will be prone to some specific natural hazard. For example, wildfires might be more predominant in the US, but maybe floods, more floods in Mozambique, Southern Africa. So we are expecting to use those different data sets to look at different kind of aspects of natural hazard in that sense. So, and build some kind of idea, because bottom line, we also want to understand the preconditions that allow this community to be vulnerable, right? So what kind of environmental conditions make those increased vulnerability to climate change and other stuff. Yeah, thanks. I don't know if
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're out of time. Let's take a couple of minutes